The real problem with the VA starts with Congress. Every single time that the United States Congress creates a benefits program for veterans, they do it with the wrong premise to begin with. And that premise is a question. That question is, how do we make sure nobody who doesn't deserve this benefit gets access to it? And when you start with that incorrect premise, you then, one, have to exclude a bunch of people who you believe don't deserve it. And I personally don't believe that there are veterans who don't deserve access to the system. But the other thing you do is even the veterans who you think do deserve it, now you've created a labyrinthine system in order to keep out these so-called undeserving veterans. And now the rest of us have to navigate that. And that's where you get the maze that politicians love to criticize, but they created it in Congress in the first place.
Welcome to Assembly Required. I'm your host, Stacey Abrams. My grandfather served in World War II and in the Korean War. After each deployment, though, he returned to a nation that denied him the full measure of citizenship due to segregation. Over time, however, our country has made good on many of its promises to those who serve in our armed forces. Often, though, enforcing those commitments has required civic action, federal legislation, and public protest. We are quickly approaching one of those moments again. Which is why on today's show, I want to talk about veterans. The millions of brave individuals who choose to serve and protect our country, and to whom we owe a full measure of gratitude and protection after their tours are done. America's veterans are commanding a great deal of attention recently, and rightly so, because they are being disproportionately impacted by the Trump administration's reckless attack on the federal government and by the silence of Republicans in office. Last week, the Veterans Affairs Department announced that it would be cutting nearly 80,000 staff workers as part of an agency-wide reorganization. This news was preceded by the mass federal layoffs that Elon Musk and his team implemented that resulted in nearly 222,000 job cuts and counting. This news was preceded by the mass federal layoffs that Elon Musk and his team implemented that resulted in nearly 222,000 job cuts and counting. And that's not to mention the veterans impacted by the executive orders eliminating DEI in the federal workforce. For example, under the Veterans Preference Act of 1944, military vets receive priority in hiring and retention for certain federal civilian jobs if they meet specific service-related criteria. That is under attack because of the attack on DEI. From erasing our nation's actual history, to harming the financial well-being of vets who receive funding due to their status, to the grotesque behavior towards the transgender service members and vets, this administration has abandoned traditional Republican support of the military, American support of the military. The implications of these decisions have an outsized effect because veterans make up 30% of the federal workforce. That's 30. Serving in every department from Homeland Security and Social Security to Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. They also comprise 26% of the workforce at the Department of Veterans Affairs. But what makes the current cuts and firings even worse is that our government is already woefully underserving this population. Despite making up only 7% of the population of the U.S., nearly 13% of those experiencing homelessness are veterans. In January of 2024, tragically, the suicide rates among veterans remained staggeringly high. The Department of Veterans Affairs, which includes the perennially challenged Veterans Health Administration, or VA collectively, is a lifeline for millions, providing essential healthcare services, crucial education opportunities, drug rehabilitation, mental health services, and financial benefits. While the Trump administration may argue that the cuts are only to personnel and not to the benefits and services provided, that's not quite true. In fact, the current proposals to pass a continuing resolution or to deliver a fiscal budget later on this year both rely on slashing nutritional assistance, which 1.2 million vets rely on. Yes, 1.2 million of our former service members use food stamps or SNAP. Add that indignity to the loss of personnel in an already overburdened system, and it is ludicrous to suggest that these cuts will not have a negative, harmful impact on the quality of care and support provided to our vets. So this week, we're taking a deep dive into how our nation's veterans have been targeted under Trump's second administration, from the federal to the local level. And we'll talk about what we can do to defend those who are willing to serve their country and risk the ultimate sacrifice. To help us with this, I've invited two incredible guests. First, my dear friend, Army veteran and former Secretary of State of Missouri, Jason Kander. And later, Layla Ireland, Army veteran and member of Sparta Pride, a group of trans service members and veterans dedicated to making the U.S. military inclusive. So let's get into it. Jason Kander, welcome to Assembly Required.
Pleased to be here.
Well, thank you. So last week, it was reported that the Department of Veterans Affairs is planning a so-called reorganization, and it will be cutting over 80,000 jobs from the agency. That's on top of existing concerns about VA staffing and the other implications of the changes with the Trump administration. So I want to start with a big picture question for you to get at the heart of why this matters so much. One, what does the Department of Veterans Affairs do? And then two, how could these massive personnel changes affect services?
Sure. So one, what the VA does is it is, for the most part, particularly the Veterans Health Administration, is a massive, healthcare operation. They run a lot of hospitals, they run all sorts of things. But the other thing it is it's in charge of benefits for veterans. So managing the benefits programs that are put in place by Congress, and deciding who qualifies for them based on those parameters, right? But a huge part of it is veterans hospitals, veterans medical care, right? How these cuts affect it massively. And so what the Trump administration has said and what they're going to continue to say is, well, what we're not doing is we're not cutting frontline medical personnel. One, I know enough people at the VA to know that's just simply not true. When you have a rule across government that say things like, everybody has to come into the office now and there will be no more remote workers. Well, now you've already cut some people who are providing direct frontline medical care. But beyond that, anybody who's ever been to a doctor's office understands that if you were to walk into your doctor's office and the man or woman who you meet at the front of the office, who you check in with, who handles your insurance, that kind of thing, if that person disappeared and now you had to walk in and your doctor was the one doing all that, everybody understands that it would affect your medical care. And it would affect how many people they could see, how many they could see a day, how long they could spend with those people, and how much they'd be able to concentrate on that medical care. So it is a massive disruption.
And then when we widen out from the hospital services, what are other services that vets look at the VA to secure?
Let's start with the stuff that people are more familiar with, like veterans disability, right? If you have a service-connected disability, I do. I have post-traumatic stress from my service. There are people who administer that program, who take the claims in, who handle the claims, who then service the claims, and then you have all sorts of other benefits as well, right? And not just the disability benefits, but home loans and that sort of thing. But to really zoom out for a minute, it is a very popular occupation of politicians, and this has been true across both parties, to just crap on the VA on a regular basis. And this works as a substitute for actually doing anything for veterans, right? Like we've been seeing this for generations, that if you're a politician and you want to act like you are somebody who cares about veterans, there's a couple things you do. One, you put a whole bunch of pictures of people in uniform on your website. And then two, you go out and you say, well, we've really got to do something about the VA. We got to make it more efficient. We got to do something about the backlog. And you demonize the VA. If you talk to veterans who go to the VA for their services, of which I am one, most of them will tell you, yes, there are bureaucratic issues with the VA, but once you are in the system and once you are getting care, it is pretty phenomenal most of the time. And the reason for that is that the people who work at the VA do it by choice. The vast majority of people there, they're not just there, they don't just want a government job, they don't just want a healthcare job. They chose to work at the VA, and they work with veterans every single day. So when they are working with somebody who has a lower back problem, it's not the same as if you go for your lower back problem to a regular doctor. Now you're going to somebody who sees veterans all the time, and they are versant in the idea that, oh, you were in the infantry for your first 2 years. You carried 50 pounds on your back over large distances, so we know a lot about your back problem, and we know how to treat it very specifically. So all that is to say that when politicians, the Trump administration included, just demonize the VA and act like the problem is always just wasted the VA, what they miss is that the real problem with the VA starts with Congress. Every single time that the United States Congress creates a benefits program for veterans, they do it with the wrong premise to begin with. And that premise is a question. That question is, how do we make sure nobody who doesn't deserve this benefit gets access to it? And when you start with that incorrect premise, you then, one, have to exclude a bunch of people who you believe don't deserve it. And I personally don't believe that there are veterans who don't deserve access to the system. But the other thing you do is even the veterans who you think do deserve it, now you've created a labyrinthine system in order to keep out these so-called undeserving veterans. And now the rest of us have to navigate that. And that's where you get the maze that politicians love to criticize, but they created it in Congress in the first place.
So, Jason, I want to take a step back, as you said, and go to just the fundamental question that I didn't think we would have to ask, but that I think underlies what you were just describing about Congress. Why should we care about the current attack on veterans? Why should that be a signal that puts everyone on edge, not just those who are directly impacted?
I will give you three reasons. One, if they can get away with politically coming after veterans, then nobody is safe. I mean, right? Like we have been, frankly, sometimes I think to an uncomfortable level, venerated and placed on a pedestal to a level that, a lot of us are not comfortable with and they may not be appropriate, but we have been politically. And if they can get away with that, they can come after whatever thing it is that you care about, no matter who you are. Two, a lot of people are familiar with the statistic that 22 veterans a day on average take their own lives. What very few people know is the statistic within that statistic, which is out of that 22 on average, 16 of those veterans every day, 16 of those veterans that take their lives every day are not connected to any veteran-specific service of any kind at the time that they take their life, which means if you make it more difficult to access veteran services and you close that side aperture even more so it's even harder to get them, you absolutely will have more veteran suicide. And then the third reason is that we vastly underestimate the degree to which veterans still have a lot to offer as fully contributing members of our society. And when we make it that much more difficult to make the transition from the military back into civilian life by making these benefits that much more difficult to access, then we are just frankly missing out in the corporate world, in the nonprofit world, in the public sector, wherever, on a lot of really outstanding, highly trained people. But if we're not getting them what they need to transition out of the military and into civilian life, then we are going to miss the benefit of those people in our communities.
You should run for office one day.
Thanks.
So we know that cuts at the VA aren't the only ones that are impacting veterans. I mentioned at the top of the program, vets comprise about 30% of the federal workforce, as you just described, and that's in part due to the Veterans Preference Act of 1944. And recently, around 6,000 vets were laid off, with the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee suggesting that the number is likely higher due to ongoing cuts. So what are you hearing from fellow veterans about these job losses, and what does it signal about what's happening in our country?
Like, let's forget Doge and Musk and Trump and that for a moment. And let's just talk about where this philosophy comes from in the first place, about the ease with which they cut government jobs, the ease with which they disrespect the people who have government jobs. I remember back when I was a state legislator and I was on the state budget committee, I can remember every year there was this amendment that they would try to pass, the Republicans. And what it did is it it put a ceiling on any government employee's salary of $80,000. And their reasoning for that was, well, the lieutenant governor of Missouri has an $80,000 a year salary, and that's the second most powerful person in the state. We would point out that the lieutenant governor in Missouri is a part-time position, and that it is usually somebody like a practicing attorney or something like that. But that aside for a minute, what it all came from, when you would talk to these Republican legislators, was a genuine belief that if you were any good at what you do, you wouldn't be working in the government, right? They didn't care that there were people who had PhDs and worked on public health or conservation and had chosen to do government service because that's what they believed was the highest calling for them of using their expertise. They didn't care about that. They just fundamentally believed that if you were any damn good at all, you would be working in the private sector making a lot of money. And if you work in the government, it must be that you couldn't get one of those jobs. Now, that was very familiar to me when I started to hear it because it reminded me a lot of when I was in college, and it was right after 9/11, and I volunteered for the Army. And I had all these, in this case, liberal professors who were acting like, why would you go into the Army? You got into college, right? So to me, it was two different sides of the same coin. This belief that you only do a government job or you only do a military job if you don't have another option. What both of those point of views miss is that these are people who care about other people who came out of the military and and I've experienced with this and felt like I can't go from, getting up every day and knowing what my mission is and believing in what I'm doing to getting up every day and being like, my job is to make the most money I can. It just didn't work for me, and it doesn't work for a lot of veterans. So how does it affect those veterans? It is not as simple as they lost their job and they lost their income. They're going to lose their sense of mission, and they're going to lose their sense of belonging. And meanwhile, they were probably pretty damn good at what they did. And so we're going to miss out on the service that they're providing.
Assembly Required with Stacie Abrams is brought to you by Helix. With all of my travel, few things are better than returning to the comforts of home. And ever since I got my Helix mattress, the experience of coming back to my own bed has only gotten more luxurious. With Helix, I can sleep through the night, and I wake up more refreshed and ready to go. Designed with the sleeper in mind, Helix offers quality rest and makes it easier for me to try and make my bedtime. There's enough in the news to keep us up at night. Do yourself a favor and get a mattress that doesn't make falling asleep even harder. Check out Helix for a better sleeping experience and use a special code for the listeners of Assembly Required. Go to helixsleep.com/assembly for 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/assembly for 20% off site-wide. helixsleep.com/assembly. Assembly Required with Stacie Abrams is brought to you by Mosh. Like most people, I want to be more thoughtful about what I eat. As a host of a podcast about taking action and solving problems, I like that Mosh can help me take care of my body and do some good. Mosh, which you may have heard about on Shark Tank, was founded by Maria Shriver and her son, Patrick Schwarzenegger, with a simple mission: to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Maria's father suffered from Alzheimer's, and since then, she and Patrick have dedicated themselves to finding ways to help other families dealing with this debilitating disease. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientist and functional nutritionist to go beyond your average protein bar. With 8 delicious flavors, including a plant-based one in peanut butter and chocolate, each Mosh bar is made with ingredients that support brain health, like ashwagandha, lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. And now, Mosh bars come with a new look and new formulation, featuring a game-changing, brain-boosting ingredient you won't find in any other bar. Mosh is now the first and only food brand boosted with cognizin, a premium nootropic that supplies the brain with a patented form of acetylcholine. But here's the best part. To help you do good, like we aim to do at Assembly Required, Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. Why gender-based? 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women. Mosh is working closely to close the gap between women and men's health research. I like that I can give back to others while fueling both my body and my brain. And I like that there's so many great flavors to choose from, so that fueling my active brain during a busy day doesn't get boring. My favorite flavor right now is peanut butter chocolate crunch, but lemon white chocolate crunch is a close second. Head to moshlife.com/assembly to save 20% off plus free shipping on the Bestsellers Trial Pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on the Bestsellers Trial Pack at moshlife.com/assembly. Thank you, Mosh, for sponsoring this episode.
The Park of Secrets.
In the year 2060, near the heart of Florida, just a stone's throw from Disney World, stood a theme park unlike any other, a place known as the House of Secrets. It was a magical park, much like a state fair, filled with towering rides, carnival games, and parades that drew people from all over the world. But among the grand Ferris wheel and the colorful day parade, there was one attraction that outshined them all: the parade princess, a mesmerizing mermaid named Kenya. Kenya was a sight to behold. At 22 years old, fresh out of college, she had the kind of beauty that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Her brown skin glowed under the park lights, her hair a stunning mix of purple and pink that cascaded over her shoulders. Little pink hearts adorned her cheeks, and a ribbon of color stretched across her nose. But it wasn't just her beauty that made her special.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
Set in the year 2063, Park of Secrets, The return follows the emotional and powerful journey of Kenya, once the beloved princess of the Park of Secrets, a magical theme park where love and joy flourished under her reign. After being driven away by betrayal and deceit, Kenya finds herself in a dark place, ready to give up on life. With the help of a fairy godmother, she is shown that her beloved park has fallen into ruin under the harsh rule of the evil Hilda. Reinvigorated with purpose, Kenya returns to reclaim what was hers. Along the way, she confronts her old enemies, including Thomas, who betrayed her, and Hilda, the oppressive ruler determined to keep her power.
In a quaint village, Jamie, a young baker living in a mushroom-shaped house, is beloved for his delicious, mushroom-shaped cakes. Lucas, a skilled handyman known for helping the townspeople, frequently visits Jamie for treats and to lend a hand. When Jamie's baking supplies are delayed due to a supplier going out of business, he becomes distraught. Lucas comforts him, and in that moment, they realize their growing feelings for each other. As Lucas helps Jamie find a new supplier and supports him through his struggles, their bond deepens into love. Soon, the village comes to see them as a perfect pair, celebrating their sweet connection. To get your copy of The Baker and the Handyman's Sweet Connection, please visit lulubooks.com. This is an electronic book, so be sure to have an EPUB or PDF reader to enjoy this heartwarming story by Ariel Williams.
To view more ebooks, click Linktree in bio.
I told you. What did I tell you? Didn't I tell you? 'Cause I told you. And when did I tell you? A long time ago. And what did I say will happen when I told you? Exactly what just happened.